When I was younger, not all that long ago, I was a staunch believer in direct democracy. For those of you who don't know, direct democracy is a democracy where the people or subjects of the sovereign have ultimate input and power in governance. In practice, this would essentially mean that people would vote on passages of bills, initiatives, and laws themselves and not through an appointed representative, as is most common today. The reason this was appealing for me was at the time I truly believed that was the ultimate goal of democracy, was to be as democratic as possible. And with the rise of the internet and personal computers, I saw this possibility finally being an easily achievable one. In the age of enlightenment, when monarchies started getting replaced by democracies, there was no direct or instant method of communication. The electronic telegraph was new, and the infrastructure for it was not developed yet. And even once it was, the electronic telegraph was not a vital option for many, as it was expensive and you needed a post and a translator. It really wasn't until the internet where the masses truly became connected with each other. So democracies had to be developed in the form of a representative democracy, where the people would elect a representative to physically go to the governmental gatherings and the conventions in order to vote on the people's behalf. This was understandable, as not only were people not well connected, but also information was not as readily available as it is today. But with the advent of personal computers and the internet, it started to seem a bit ridiculous to me at the time if the government was going to pass a law that the people would be subject to. Say, should it be illegal to smoke in public places, then why not ask the people directly if they want this law in place? After all, they are the ones that would have to abide by it. Why not allow the people to have more, if not ultimate, say in government? Isn't the government meant to serve them? Things like the Carpenter experiment of 1991 gave me the belief that human society could work together to achieve goals and positive outcomes. They took a large collection of people and put them in a room, gave them paddles. On one side was green, on the other side was red. As they flashed one side or the other, they had control on what was happening on a screen. On the screen was the classic game of Pong. Half the people in the room controlled one side and the other half controlled the other side. If you flash one color, the paddle would move up, and if you flash the other color, the paddle would move down. Together, collectively, they were able to show that play Pong effectively without a hierarchy power telling them what to do. Unfortunately, a lot of what was said there in the documentary was a lie. The experiment was held at a computer conference, so everyone there were computer geeks, programmers, and other highly educated intellectual individuals, not the most honest sample to represent the general population. Also, they were given some instructions on how this worked. They were told this half of the room controlled one side and the other controlled the other. Another thing worth noticing is how impromptu leaders arose. You can hear some people yell green, green, red, red, red in order to achieve the desired outcome. Some people had to rise up and take control. Another thing is that the purpose was very direct and clear, not a lot of room for misinformation. Everyone knows how to play Pong, and everyone knows the objective of the game, something that may not be said about general civil problems. As I lived through the 2000s and 2010s, my faith in American voters got pretty much completely destroyed. In the 2000s, I saw how the media can easily manipulate the voter. I saw that 72% of Americans think that Saddam Hussein was at least partly responsible for 9/11, when in fact it was primarily Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. Yet the voters were completely led to forget about Saudi Arabia and take out their anger on the innocent Iraqis for something they had no role in whatsoever in. This led me to believe that in a country where the free press is adamantly protected, then a direct democracy may not be very functional, as the media would then become the ultimate power with the ability to sway voters and set the narrative that they wanted, a mediacracy if you will. But I hadn't really fully given up faith on a direct democracy. I still believed that bad information could be combated with good information, and that when presented with good information conflicting inaccurate bad information, that people would generally select to put their biases aside and select the more honest and truthful information. Then 2016 happened, and man, I felt so naive for thinking that way. 2016 was a wash of fake news and falsehoods, Most people I interacted with at the time gave little care to decipher. If the information aligned well with their preconceived thoughts, then they were immediately accepted as truth, while information that conflicted with their beliefs, no matter how accurate, was completely disregarded. I became exposed to the hard reality of human cognitive bias, and it was far worse than I ever imagined before 2016. Even though the writing was on the walls, Obama had a very hard time in office with it, constantly fighting misconceptions and opposition that made no sense. In the end, I felt that was not the majority of Americans. After all, Obama won elections, and the Congress was gerrymandered, and Congress was getting low approval ratings. So I was seeing Obama's tenure not as a failure of the American voter, but rather as a failure of our representative democracy and the media stoking hyper-partisanship. Before Reagan, the U.S. had the Fairness in Reporting Doctrine. It was introduced in 1949 and was an FCC policy that required the holders of broadcast licenses to both present controversial issues of public importance and to do so in a manner that was honest, equitable, and balanced. And its legality in U.S. law was reinforced by the court ruling of Red Lion Broadcasting Company versus FCC, where the Supreme Court upheld the FCC's general right to enforce the fairness doctrine where channels were limited. However, the court did not rule that the FCC was obliged to do so. The fairness doctrine's demise under a Reagan administration paved the way for radically biased information that later became souped up by the coming of mass communication and media sharing through the internet. Political echo chambers became the norm, and a new age of hyperpolarization in American politics was upon us. It's almost like the Republicans made a calculated decision that they could not advance their agenda anymore through fair and accurate information. Maybe if the fairness doctrine was not eliminated, then the events of the last 20 years would not have been so detrimental to American democracy, and my faith in direct democracy would not be so disturbed. I think the only way for a direct democracy to work would be to have a rational public as well as a well-informed public, and a public that has good moral values, because sometimes the right thing is not always in the interest of the majority. Unfortunately, right now in July 2020, I do not think the American public is near being those things. Maybe in the future we will be, but it seems we have a long way to go still.